Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Tom Keene, along with Paul Sweeney. Join us each day for insight from the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app. Joining us now on what we have witnessed from the former President of the United States and what we may witness forward from the President of the United States, Gregory Valliere. Greg, I've got to go to your note of 2 days ago on Mr. Biden. It's the strongest, most blistering note I've ever seen from Gregory Valliere, and ever, folks, is a long time. You said this is elder abuse. Discuss. Greg, could you hear me?
Oh, right, Tom. Right. Good morning.
Yeah,
I think it is. I think there are people in the inner circle in the Biden camp who have been disingenuous with him, have not told him what is really going on. And I think that at some point, these people are going to have to answer for their behavior toward this very, very frail old man.
What is the best outcome for the Democrats to stagger to Sunday?
Well, I think that they're getting closer to ousting him. I think it's going to happen. I think, frankly, Tom, the only issue is when, not whether. And then they'll move on. I think they'll try to create some excitement over Kamala Harris, and they may get some excitement over her. It can only be her as the replacement. I do not see any of these very intriguing young governors being quite ready yet.
Greg, what did you think of Donald Trump's speech last night?
It was too. First of all, it was too long. It ended at 12:09. I don't think a lot of people in the East were awake at 12:09. It was the longest convention speech ever, and he should have reduced it. Also, I thought that there were parts of the speech where he didn't have a lot of energy, where he was rambling. It didn't really impress me.
What do you think of Lara Trump and, her, Trump's grandchildren on her lap and the role that she played? I mean, she's co-chair of the RNC, and obviously, there was a lot of camera footage on her if you watched it. I mean, talk to me a little bit about his family. They're finally showing up. What kind of role does Trump's character play in this race?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to present a more mellow Donald Trump, focusing on his family, and that may work. But let me just make this quick point.
Please.
I think the key here is not energizing the base. The base is really energized right now. The key is, did they win many moderate and centrist voters with the right. convention? I'm not sure the center was all that impressed.
Well, let's go there in the time we've got left this morning, Greg. We've got the appointment of a vice president who a lot of people pushed against, insiders in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And then we had this original speech by the former president. Do you detect in any way a new Donald Trump?
Could be. It could be that Vance will influence him. And a lot about Vance is encountered opposition. He's not that crazy about Wall Street. He's not that crazy about big business. His views on abortion are quite radical. So I think Vance may actually drag Trump into a more radical stance.
Is there polling now for all of our listeners across this nation, whatever their politics? Is there polling that informs Greg Valliere now about the set of outcomes past Sunday?
Well, let's see this weekend. All the big polls will be out on Saturday or Sunday, so the Sunday talk shows will be very interesting. But the only one I've seen that impressed me in the last few days, I think, was CBS. I mean, obviously, Trump is ahead, but I don't think he's ahead by an insurmountable margin.
Right. Greg, thank you so much for the time, and apologies for the airline upset and cyber stuff that we see this morning. Gregory Valliere helping us out, and with an important note. See that note, read that note from AGF Investments. So there's a snippet of C code, which is part of an SLOC, FOR space parentheses, I space equals space 0, semicolon, space I space is less than 100, semicolon, and on. Good morning, Mandeep Singh.
Good morning, Tom.
Is it one line of SLOC that is causing this agony worldwide this morning?
I mean, clearly they shipped something last night, CrowdStrike did, and it was meant for a Windows update, and that is what it's, and now they have rolled it back.
But what is the what that caused it? A bungled project? Could it be one little typo in PRINTF parentheses, quote, hello, quote?
Anytime you make changes at the operating system level, I mean, it hits you right there in terms of, bringing down all your critical systems. And we have seen all kinds of breaches, over the past 12 months and longer.
Yeah.
But the OS, the operating system breaches are the worst because they just bring the system down. And I stand corrected. It's not a breach, it's an outage. So nobody actually hacked the system. It was a code that was shipped by CrowdStrike. And that is what caused a kernel to malfunction and the operating system couldn't start.
The kernel malfunctioned, but the major came to the rescue.
Mandeep, I'm not Tom Keene. I'm not going to ask you to answer a question with a 0 or a 1, but I do need to know this. Who benefits here? I mean, CrowdStrike, this outage is pretty significant, right? Who are the companies that are best positioned to advance their own agenda at the expense of CrowdStrike here?
I mean, one of the issues that the industry was dealing with is, do we need agent-based solutions when it comes to cybersecurity? And the answer here is agent-based solutions put at risk a Microsoft whose operating system goes down. So why can't we have agentless solutions? And there are plenty of vendors that have agentless based approach. Now, there are pros and cons to both of them. So not that agentless will solve all your problems, but clearly I think this benefits the agentless vendors. And in fact, Google is looking to buy one of them with security that was rumored, and everyone thought 23 billion was so expensive. Well, guess what?
It's not anymore.
It's not anymore.
Well, that's Wiz, right?
Wiz.
Yeah. What's the difference between Wiz and CrowdStrike?
Wiz doesn't have an agent that needs to be installed at the operating system level. So you don't need to install Wiz agent within Windows. It will still work because it's monitoring your workloads outside of the operating system. Nothing needs to be installed. It's a solution that is agentless. And that's why, if it can be same in terms of, the efficacy, then companies would rather prefer that as opposed to changing the, the structure of Windows.
Mandeep, how is AI affecting the enterprise security sector?
Well, AI opens more doors where you could be vulnerable. So if you are using a lot of network traffic to train your AI, well, guess what? Somebody needs to inspect that traffic. Right. And so, if you are personalizing based on AI, that personalized data can be hacked. So there are so many different vectors when it comes to cybersecurity, but nothing hits you as badly as a system-wide outage where you can't even access your systems. I mean, think about the repercussions. You have to roll back transactions. You have lost business because your systems weren't live. It's huge.
What's the impact on Microsoft?
Exactly. What's Microsoft doing right now?
I mean, the fact that it was Microsoft and not other operating system companies like Apple or, we didn't hear anything about Google Cloud being down. Right. So clearly that puts into focus why Microsoft couldn't pick, a malicious update like this, where I shouldn't call it malicious. It could be an error.
Lisa's taking notes. Lisa's daughter is like #1 in the world in softball, and they're working off a Mac platform. What's the Mac Microsoft distinction here in this outage of Microsoft?
Well, so Mac has traditionally been more secure. Like, you don't hear about as many hacks or vulnerabilities for Mac OS compared to a Windows operating system, and that has been the case throughout. It's just when you do things at the server level, it brings down an entire system as opposed to somebody having to pay ransomware because they can't access their laptop. This is huge. This is system-wide. Your whole system is down. It's not about paying ransomware and bringing it live up.
Tom, look at Mandeep over here. I mean, I thought we weren't going to hear or see Mandeep until the 30th of this month when Amazon and Apple and everybody report. Microsoft is on the 30th. I mean, look at you. Did you have to come in special today just because of this outage? I mean, what are your plans this summer?
I come to work every day, Damien. I love my work.
What are they doing at Microsoft now? I think people may own CrowdStrike or they want to buy it down 16% or whatever. Give me that, Bob, as you can, where CrowdStrike is. But a lot of people own Microsoft, even within their pension plans as well. Like Satya Nadella gets a phone call, 3 a.m. We got a problem. Then what happens among people like you at Microsoft?
I think Microsoft, being a big security player themselves, this puts into question why can't they protect their cloud for any sorts of things that could impact the runtime of the cloud. I mean, this is a 24/7 business, and because all the systems are concentrated with the cloud hyperscalers, like Amazon, Microsoft, Google systems being down brings the whole internet down.
Do we have reporting that the cloud is down?
No.
We don't.
It never does. Mandeep, I have one last question for you, really. I mean, last night we had the Trump, the RNC. I just got to ask you, off the top of your head here, what does your gut tell you? Regulation for big tech. Do you expect that to increase under a Trump administration?
Well, it's so uncertain when it comes to the views coming from former President Trump that you can't really make a lot out of what he's going to do actually versus what the election rhetoric is. And at this point of time, one thing is sure, they're going to look to break up Meta. They're not looking to ban TikTok. And, those are the things that are becoming obvious with the election rhetoric.
And Zuckerberg was on the tape. Did you hear what he said about Trump?
Yes.
I mean, he was impressed by the reaction after the assassination attempt. So,
So, Mandeep, what will you study in the next 6 hours? You're here at Bloomberg. We're humbled that people like you have made the Bloomberg system work. Good morning to the 4,000 people that do this worldwide every day. So then you're going to sit at your desk.
Study the weather forecast.
What will you attempt to observe out in the zeitgeist to assist our listeners?
This is not the first time CrowdStrike has shipped an update to their software. So why did it happen? Because remember, all these companies have made a lot of tuck-in acquisitions. Now, if this vulnerability arose because they made an acquisition and embedded it in their product, that would be interesting to look at as well. Because as we know, all these things need to be tested properly. And in this case, obviously it wasn't.
Mandeep Singh, thank you so much.
Unbelievable.
It's a perfect day to enjoy a short 30 minutes, two short 30 minutes with Abby Joseph Cohen. The office at Columbia Business School is 574 Kravis. When the students walk through the door, do they shake?
They bow down, Tom.
They bow down and kneel?
I have so much enjoyed working with the students, but also the faculty members. It's a pleasure to be working with a number of people whose names you would recognize, but also a lot of the up-and-comers.
2 years into the game, do the underlying theories that you owned and I was weaned on, do they still work? Does Sharp, does Fama of Chicago, the other giants, do those theories still work in this market?
This is a market clearly that is breaking a lot of rules. The question is, do we get back to those rules? And as you know, my own personal rule of thumb, Tom, has always been that one must pay attention to things like valuation models based on fundamentals. But that doesn't mean that the market is always at equilibrium.
Damien's dying to get in here.
Oh, yeah. But let me make one other comment, if I may.
And keep Damien out of it. Good.
And that is we swing from one level of disequilibrium to another. So market cycles are typically going from undervaluation through fair value to overvaluation. And the question, I think, for today is, as we swing back down, where do we stop?
Okay, I'm going to rip up the script here right now. And we've got Abby for the entire half hour. Meghdon Desai of LSE wrote a book in fury out of the financial crisis. Goldman Sachs caused the financial crisis,
right, of course.
In case you didn't know, on Walrasian general equilibrium theory. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's flawed, but it's the best tool we have. Is our global Walrasian equilibrium in finance and in investment, is it still in place?
It seems to me that it's always something we need to keep in mind, but I think that some of the best calls that get made by strategists, for example, is identifying the situations that keep you off of equilibrium, number one, and number two, identifying the catalysts that will do that. So, for example, there have been many people talking about the peculiarity of the U.S. equity market recently with the over-concentration in a very small number of names. But the magic, of course, is identifying the catalyst that would move that away, and also figuring out what the ultimate target might be. Doesn't mean you get there, but it gives you a sense of direction.
Abby, you mentioned catalyst, and so that takes me to the concept of factor investing in equities and how it's changed so very much. And I'm a big fan of GSAM, Cliff Asness, this GSAM factor indices, the long, short, value, the growth, but there's quality, there's low volatility, there's all these different factors that are driving equities. What beta regime are we in now? And what beta regime do you think we're going into through the end of this year?
Well, that is a very good question, and a highly technical one, but let me answer it in a somewhat different way. And that has to do with the level of concentration that we're seeing in markets. Okay. And the focus that we have on indexation, both implicit and explicit, seems to me to be driving a lot of the very extraordinarily well-developed quantitative models. It's just driving them in the wrong direction. That doesn't mean they're wrong intermediate to long term, but it doesn't really help on a trading basis. And by the way, we have seen this before, right? Years ago, there was something called the Nifty 50.
Yeah.
No.
Really? And many people listening to us may not remember that, or they may not have read about it, but there were 50 stocks that dominated the markets decades ago. And basically the question was, would it continue? And many of the companies that were included in this, including IBM, if you did the extrapolation, they were going to be 20 to 50% of U.S. GDP.
That's right.
Obviously, that is not sustainable. And then we have an even more extreme version of that now with the Magnificent Five or the Mag 7, depending upon which ones you like. And it is driven in large part by the self-fulfilling prophecy of people using indexed approaches, particularly market cap indexed approaches. And you guys have talked about this before, so I'm not going to belabor it.
Tom, Abby is blaming Larry Fink and BlackRock.
No, I'm not.
For concentration risk in the equity market.
I am focusing on the idea that everyone has been emphasizing relative performance vis-a-vis the index and doing it on a very short-term basis. And there are some great companies out there that have been facilitating that for investors who wanted to get it done because it's low cost and so on. And if you are a professional investor, many of them don't want to veer too far from the index because if you're wrong, better to be wrong with lots of company.
That's right.
And the thing,
there's a behavioral component to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that intrigues me, of course, are those people who are willing to kind of stick their necks out and say, maybe the consensus will prove to be wrong. The problem this time around, of course, has been that the movement towards 5 or 7 stocks, that level of concentration is really unparalleled.
I want to spend the entire next section on the concentration of the Mag 7. There's a small shop downtown that put out a blistering essay about 6 days ago that will... did you hire Jim Covello? Were you the one? Is it your fault?
I was involved.
It's our fault, yeah.
You were involved in it. It's going to be great. We're going to do that in the next section for Global Wall Street. I want to talk about courage to be in the market. Yeah. And the word in this room that we get from many strategists is an Abby Joseph Cohen word, which is solid. And what you say is if the American economy is solid and business is solid, you have to participate. Talk about the gloom crew that says, go to cash.
That is a fascinating question, Tom. And it seems to me that we do have an economy right now that is extremely solid. We have never seen in recent decades as strong a labor market as we have now. Wages are rising at a rate that now exceeds inflation, which is helpful, particularly for middle income and lower middle income families that have been having trouble. We have enormously strong profits. Return on equity for the S&P 500 is at an extremely high level. In fact, it might be the highest ever. So things are in fact solid. What I worry about always is that already priced into the market?
That's right, yeah.
Number one. And number two, the policies that helped get us to this, are they potentially in danger? So this is obviously a big political point in the United States right now. Policies may be changing. And among the things that I worry about, for example, would be a movement towards more significant tariffs, which are inflationary. It damages not just the economies of our trading partners, but our economy as well. I worry about whether we would step away from some of the good long-term policies implemented during the Biden administration to encourage long-term investment in public infrastructure, in technology through the CHIPS Act, basically making things here. And then, of course, the investments that are being made in alternative energy. One more point, Tom, if I may. If we're looking at where there's a shortage of something in this country, it's power, right? With all of the focus on technology, and clearly people are talking about it this morning with the outage, if we're going to be moving towards an even more tech-concentrated economy, one that is using AI, cloud services, and so on, we need a dependable grid. And one of the things under the legislation, bipartisan legislation that was passed over the last couple of years, is a development of more power sources, including alternatives.
Somebody really competent, James Covello, Georgetown, Tuck, Goldman Sachs, has said, we got a problem. We're going opposite of the way it worked at Intel and everywhere else. You have technology that comes in that's cheaper, that drives the dialogue forward. AI seems to be more expensive, polar opposite of the norm we have lived. Is there substance there to James Covello's questioning AI?
Yep. I think Jim is a very thoughtful guy who also has access to lots of information being pulled together by analysts. And what many have been hearing for the past 6 months in particular has been that companies that have been investing heavily in AI are saying they're not yet seeing the return. Economists throughout the country are saying they're not really seeing the productivity enhancements yet from AI. Now, it could be that the analyses are looking at data in a premature stage. Maybe things will improve, but clearly AI has been quite expensive at this point. There was a race in many industries to take on as much AI investment as possible, and it might take a little while to digest.
Do you believe, I'm thinking of the railroads from 1880 out to 1930, 1940, that you can partition parts of AI where there will be AI failures, but there will be AI successes, and we've already identified them, taking NVIDIA as the trophy child?
Tom, your point is very well made. Clearly, the success thus far has been in those companies providing the infrastructure, right? The ones who are providing the basic support for future investment in AI, where we've not yet seen the full payback, and maybe we won't in some companies, has to do with the application of AI. We also need to train people. Just the way everybody who's been trained in the Microsoft 365 products are feeling a little bit of pain today.
That worked out.
Sure. It'll be straightened out. People are not yet fully familiar with many of the AI product. And I believe, based upon my background in computer science, I do have an undergraduate degree in computer science. It's ancient at this point, talking about dinosaur.
Fortran.
Dinosaur, yes. Fortran, Pascal, and COBOL. Oh my gosh! But what I have seen over the years is that it takes a while for users to understand the capabilities of what they have. And I think that we're still in that gestation period for AI. What I also think, however, is that many investors in the market, because of this heavy concentration, perhaps became very enthusiastic a little bit too soon. And so we're going to need to see some digestion of that as well.
Abby, I have to ask you something that I know you're an expert about. Meme stocks, Robinhood, AMC, GameStop. Did these names ever come up in your classrooms? Are students actually investing in or asking about them?
Students are asking about them, and the response is always one of momentum investing. And what we always do is to encourage students to think about the fundamentals. What's the business plan? What's the business model?
Cash flows matter.
What do the financials look like? And if you can't make a case based on that, it's only momentum. Yeah. And that to me, in my history in the market, can take you only so far, but more importantly, only for so long. Because at some point, there's a catalyst that basically makes you stand up and say, emperor has no clothes.
Well, let's just talk about momentum as a factor, right? Look back windows and all that. There's a lot of momentum-based strategies, but, my understanding, and I don't know if it works for equity, certainly it does in FX, it's a volatility dampener, So when used with other factors, it kind of does a little bit, it improves your risk-adjusted return, your Sharpe ratio, as it were. Do you agree with that?
Momentum is something that you need to pay attention to. Part of my own fundamental analysis has always been flow of funds, because you need to say, okay, what will corporates be doing with their cash? What will individual investors, what will institutional investors be doing, and so on. And one of the things that distinguishes this period has been that those investors have all kind of coalesced around the same thing, because many of them are using the same benchmarks for performance. And that's one of the big differences this time around.
I'm going back in this insane period, and it's someone, Abby, you and I know well, Michael Mauboussin, now with a shingle out at Morgan Stanley. That's a firm across the street. Michael has been writing since 1995 brilliantly for the CFA Institute and others about the new capital allocation we're under, and the traditional Graham Dodd and Cottle capital-intensive businesses have given way to an intellectually intensive, innovation-intensive work that needs less capital and provides greater return, ROIC, and greater return and bigger cash flows. Yep. Do you buy the Kool-Aid?
I buy that to a very large extent, because it also helps explain why the U.S. economy and the U.S. equity market has so dramatically outperformed economies and markets in other parts of the world.
Can we sustain that?
I think that there are very active decisions that have already been taken in other countries to try to catch up with us. And we're not keeping our eye on the ball sufficiently. So, for example, there are industrial policies that are underway in Asia and in Europe to try to catch up with the United States in this regard. And I'm not a huge fan of industrial policies because mistakes can be made. But if you can provide a capital incentive for the right sort of investment, that to me makes a great deal of sense. There's one other piece of this, Tom, that I think we need to touch on, and that is we are in a new era in which capital is no longer free. Right? We're paying for capital now. And when there was an environment in which it was free to borrow money, you can make all kinds of interesting decisions. Now you really have to sharpen the pencil in so many areas. And it's not just what companies are doing, and it's not just what active investors are doing. It's also the use of leverage in many other investment vehicles.
Please visit with us when you stop giving out C's at Columbia Business School. Professor Joseph Cohen with us here on the New. This is is an incredible privilege. Alicia Reese is with us with just superlative academics out of UCLA. And Damien, it's great when you're doing securities analysis and you get to wake up with a giant. She gets to work with Michael Pachter every day, which is like really, really cool. Michael Pachter, I think they were making the first chip and there was no nano. There was no nano. Alicia Reese joins us now with the technology excellence of Wedbush. There's some other guy that works there as well. I can't remember who it is. Alicia, on Netflix, they own the high ground. I just did a log regression back to 2004 on Netflix, and boy, are they catching up to the long-term trend. I mean, you have an optimistic tone here. Can Netflix revert to the growthiness that we've seen the last 15, 20 years?
Well, last year we had added Netflix to our best ideas list, and shares pretty much doubled over that time. Last quarter, we removed it from our best ideas list because while we expect continued growth, it's going to be harder and harder to impress investors. It's not going to be the outsized growth that they saw when they had multiple growth fronts occurring at the same time that we're still seeing to some degree or another, but we have the password sharing crackdown that really added a lot of subscribers. The ad tier has limited churn, so instead of just dropping your subscription for a little while, you'll go try the ad tier for a little bit. Maybe you won't watch as much content. That's what we thought. Turns out people are watching just as much content, 2 hours per day per member on the service on average on both the ad tier and the premium tiers. And so they have, just a lot going for them, but a lot of that is priced into shares at this point.
Well, Alicia, let me just cut in right there. I mean, I understand that this recent earnings release from Netflix was a margin story. Talk to us about the right mix, determining that mix between content and actually making money. Have they found that nirvana, that happy place?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the point where Netflix has really been striving towards for a long time. They spent so much money on content, really racked up a lot of debt to get those subscriber numbers as high as possible for a long time, because that was investors' primary focus, was that subscriber growth. It still is to some extent, but that focus has largely shifted over to profitability, and Netflix has really soared on that note. A lot of their competitors, or most of their competitors, couldn't find profitability to save their lives, really, technically. So, a couple are, I think Disney is, turning the corner there. But a lot of the competitors, it's really hard in the streaming world to get that profitability. Netflix is wildly profitable here. And one of the things
one of their competitors is Roku, and I just have to ask you, you think about these other streaming companies, Fubo, Roku. Roku, for example, I mean, they are highly, contingent on sports content, right? On the package they have with MLB. Talk to us about sports, and sports is content for some of these. Can that really last? I mean, do you really expect these companies who are kind of relying on the NFL, these NBA deals, these 11 years, 70, whatever, billion dollar deals. Talk to us about that. What role do the streamers have in that end of the market?
Sure. I mean, sports is definitely shifting over to streaming, and we've done a lot of work around that recently. What I'd say about Roku is that they don't have to spend much at all on sports to really drive that growth for them. They have to host the services that have all that sports content. And so what Roku's doing is actually really smart. They're not spending much money on this, but they have a landing page within near search where you just go and you look under sports, and you can find where all the sports are that you're looking for, because it's so hard to figure out where your sports are playing now. Where do you find this game? Right. It could be anywhere, and they have just one game or one night of football on Amazon or YouTube or wherever it might be. And so Roku's actually easing that pain point for people without having to spend the money on the content itself. They're spending a little bit on content, but more than anything, they're just that landing page, and they can make a lot on revenue shares if people sign up for those those subscriptions on their service, and they can also advertise on there, and so they have a lot of potential there. Well, Fubo, on the other hand, has to spend a lot on content.
Alicia, I got to get two questions in here that are too important. You're lighting up YouTube live chat like nobody. You have a chart which is the absolute definitive chart of the future. Full disclosure, folks, we're on YouTube, and I subscribe with my own money to YouTube Premium. You've got a chart. I plan to change to ads from no ads. What's the trend you see of what Lisa Matteo is going to do at her house when she's sick of the ads? Are we going to switch to a premium service?
So what we've seen through our survey work over the quarters is that people, instead of, they'll have the premium service, they're not planning on watching a ton over the next few months, maybe. And so instead of hopping off the service for that period of time and choosing something else, they'll go to the ad tier. But they're also coming back from that ad tier and going back to premium. It just depends on, what their plans are for their content consumption over that time, or maybe they're just trying it out.
Right.
But people are leaving Netflix less, and I dare say the same with YouTube. People are probably pretty happy with their premium subscriptions. YouTube does deliver a lot of ads. Netflix, far, far fewer.
Okay. I got one other question, Alicia. I wasn't going to ask it, and then a second person asked it, and then a third person asked us. Now, you look on the edge of normal. Dan Ives is a life force at Wedbush, traveling worldwide. He's absolutely killed it on Apple just in the last number of months. For all of our listeners and viewers, Alicia Reese, what is it like to work with Dan Ives?
Well, we certainly do get a kick out of his outfits. He's very bright and colorful, and it's exciting, and he's just the nicest guy. He's really, really sweet and fun and lively. So his personality is genuine, as you see him on TV.
Can you tell him he's so late? He's spending all his time in Nike stores. Can you tell him I demand a sum of the parts? All the stocks he follows, I need some sensitivity analysis and sum of the parts. Damien's, get in here with one more.
Can I just ask one last question? Have you cut the cord yet in your own house?
Oh, yeah, years ago.
Years ago? Wow.
Years ago.
She's obviously not a sports fan.
Well, I'm not the biggest sports fan, and I found most of my sports on streaming. So that was the ticket, really.
Very valuable on Netflix. Alicia Reese, don't be a stranger. Thank you so much. She is with
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.